Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. David Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new teen therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. David is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
I think you must practice saying that. Hello, David, and welcome, listeners, to CoronaCast 7. David, do you want to introduce our great guest?
Yes, we have a fantastic guest. Will be familiar to and beloved by many of you, Michael Simpson, who was the star of the podcast number 169, Social Anxiety, the Case for Vulnerability. And now he comes back to join us for CoronaCast number 7 for a little follow-up plus a first-hand account of his struggles with Corona. And we're so grateful that you have survived. We were so sad and worried about you fighting this off alone in New York City in your apartment. And now that you're back among the living, back home with all the people who love you and admire you, we're just so happy and grateful. And thank you for joining us again today.
Yeah, well, guys, I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful to be back. And
you could
yeah,
move
it's great
the
to be here.
microphone a little closer to your mouth. It would help.
Sure.
There we go. That's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm grateful to be back. And yeah, quite a lot's happened since the last episode.
Okay. Well, how about before we jump into the episode, I could read a couple of endorsements that you got, David.
Right, and then I want to give a real quick commercial for my upcoming workshop with Jill Levitt on May 17th. It'll be all online, of course, but we're been preparing the workshops. It's the Cognitive Distortion Starter Kit. We're going to talk about the best techniques for each of the 10 cognitive distortions. And so this will be kind of on the methods part of TEAM. Testing, empathy, assessment of resistance, and methods. And so we'll be showing you kind of a quick start if you're working with your own negative thoughts, or if you're working with a client and the person has a lot of all or nothing thinking or emotional reasoning, self-blame, should statements, overgeneralization, labeling, mind reading, whatever it is. We're going to show you some really great techniques for each of the distortions. And now Rhonda is going to read a couple just beautiful emails that we get a flood of them every day, and we're so grateful to hear from so many of you.
Yeah. Well, this is from Josh. And Josh wrote, I've had the pleasure of attending 3 trainings by Dr. David Burns. Each time was a transformational experience. Episode 187, Live Therapy with Michael, the awesome Atlanta Teen Therapy demo, was an excellent live therapy session. Thank you. So thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah. This is from Yael. My name is Yael, and I live in Israel. I have been listening to your podcast on and off for several years now. I just listened to CoronaCast, I Might Lose My Husband with Dr. Taylor Chesney. When I listened to this episode, I was heartbroken to hear what Taylor is going through. I just want to say thank you so much for sharing that, Taylor. I know that I have personally benefited a tremendous amount from listening to your experience. It really put things in perspective for me about the challenges that I'm dealing with our family's coronavirus experience. And the last one is from Andreas. And he wrote, Hi, David. I just wanted to say hello. I listened to CoronaCast 4, I Might Lose My Husband with Taylor Chesney. It was a very brave episode, and I liked how everybody raised the stakes, so to speak, and was very real about it. I really liked your positive reframing about despair, which I thought, man, that's a tough one to reframe positively, but you did it. Thanks for all you do.
Well, thank you for all of you. And now on to today's special guest, Mr. Michael Simpson. So tell us how you are now and what you've been going through and what this journey was like, Michael.
Sure. So I guess to start, the last episode was about my journey with social anxiety, and a big part of what I learned working with David on that topic is the importance of vulnerability and opening up about my social anxiety, because I was ashamed of it. And I sort of went on this journey of becoming more comfortable with it and opening up about it, not just about social anxiety, but about lots of topics. And so that's kind of part of the background. And then what happened is on March 12th, I caught coronavirus. And that was like right at the beginning of the pandemic happening. And because I was kind of on this, I had found a lot of benefit from opening up about vulnerable topics. So I decided to document my journey with it on my Instagram. And you can check out the whole thing there if you're curious, because I'm going to be referring to lots of videos that I make on that. For example, in this episode, it's at Michael Gray Simpson, MichaelGray Simpson. And so I thought that documenting this would be good exposure work. And then also I thought, I got it very, very early. I didn't really know anybody else who had it. And that created all kinds of shame triggers, which we'll go into later. So I want to give people a look into what it could look like. Yeah, I can keep going on this, unless you guys have questions.
Well, Michael, you said you felt shame when you got the COVID-19. Is that what you're saying?
So yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I definitely thought, so like when I had it, nobody else had it. So one of my fears was, oh, people won't want to hang out with me because I've got coronavirus. People will shun me because I have coronavirus. And then I had these fears like, oh, maybe like actually this pandemic like isn't going to be as bad as as people think, and like actually not that many people will get it, and I'll kind of be the only one. Yeah, so I had those kinds of fears. And so documenting everything on social media triggered some root fears for me, which come up quite a lot. So one of them being, I'm afraid of being judged as just like judged as kind of weak or unappealing. And then also this fear, like I'm afraid people will leave. That one comes up a lot. And at the time when as I was posting this sort of these updates, which took the form of like a series of videos and kind of symptoms updates over the space of a couple of weeks, at times these fears were super intense and I often believed them. So I imagine like people not wanting to talk to me, girls not being interested in me. I even convinced myself that one of my friends wasn't talking to me as a result. So yeah, those were kind of like the fears. And I think I experienced these fears when I speak one-on-one to people about vulnerable topics, but like as I've done it more and more and more one-on-one, I don't really get those fears. Like say they were at like 80 out of 100 before, they're now at kind of maybe 10 or 15. But there's something about doing it online to everybody like I've ever met at once that makes it really difficult. That made it really difficult. Yeah.
Are you somebody that posts a lot online, like on Instagram?
What's that?
Are you someone that posts a lot on Instagram?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
One interesting thing is that it's perhaps a trivial point in comparison with the really exciting things that you're talking about, confronting your fears, the shame, thinking the thoughts, telling yourself you're weak, people won't want to hang out with you, people will judge me as unappealing, they will leave me, and these are kind of like core fears of yours. And the cognitive model, going back at least 2,000 years, is so simple, and yet most people don't get it. And that's that we're not upset by things, by events, but by the views we have of them, the views we take of them. That's what Epictetus wrote in his book, the Enchiridion, published, around the year 100 or something of that nature. And what that means is and it seems kind of lame in this coronavirus era. People say, oh, it's real. Who would want cognitive therapy? It's a real terrifying event that's sweeping the world. And a young woman emailed me yesterday saying, the world is coming to an end. What can we do? How could I possibly, work on my thoughts? Everything is terrible. But it's really, really the truth that the coronavirus could never upset a human being. It's your thoughts about it, what you're telling yourself. And we all think about things in our own unique ways. And who would have ever thought that the big upset when you are one of the first to come down with a deadly virus would have to do with feeling that people would judge you and shun you and judge you as weak and unappealing. And how courageous of you that instead of ruminating on those thoughts the way so many of us might do, you decided to use the experimental technique and test those fears by posting on Instagram and find out how are people really going to react to me. And you said that was actually one of the most frightening forms of exposure to do it online. Tell us more about your experience and adventure, Michael.
Yeah, so I think one interesting point to add to what you've just said is, yeah, it was interesting that like when I got the disease, I wasn't actually afraid of the actual disease itself, because I was super fortunate in that I like avoided any lung complications. I avoided like the really scary symptoms. So and like I'd seen the stats and I was like, okay, like probably I'm gonna be okay, given that like I it's just gonna suck for a while. Yeah, and my main fears are around other people, which is like, it's just an interesting example of that, of what you're saying.
Right. So you weren't afraid, oh, I'm going to die, or I'm going to go to the hospital, I have to get ventilated. You were more thinking, I'm afraid people are going to judge me as weak, or I'll be unappealing.
Right. Yeah.
One thing I want to just mention here is we're all kind of relaxed, talking in this casual way, but you were telling me that these fears were extremely intense. This is not some trivial little thing. Can you tell us about that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, so when I think it was like just before I started posting it, or as I was posting it, I had moments where I was sitting on the couch, where I would just go into this like, I would just convince myself people were leaving, or people were judging me, or this person wasn't going to talk to me again, something like that. And they seemed very real at the time. It's like I enter into this sort of hypnosis, I enter into this hypnosis, and all these fears seem very real, and it's very uncomfortable. Yeah.
That microphone is great now. The way you just had it was working well. And I love what you're saying, because all anxiety is a form of self-hypnosis. Because when you're anxious, you're telling yourself things that simply are not true. A stage hypnotist can tell someone, oh, you're a dog, and the person will start barking. But we can hypnotize ourselves, and it's impossible to feel anxiety without being in a state of self-hypnosis. And you tell yourself things that are totally fraudulent for the most part when you're anxious. And you're telling yourself, oh, people won't want to talk to me, I'm disgusting, I'm unattractive, I'll be shunned by people. And when you're alone, you don't have any evidence to contradict those thoughts. So those thoughts create intense anxiety. And then I have this thing called emotional reasoning, when then you say, oh gosh, I'm so anxious, I'm so scared, it must be real. I must be in real danger. And I can imagine that was a kind of emotional hell for you.
Yeah, it definitely, when I was like deep in the hypnosis, it was, it all seemed very real. And it was quite unpleasant. Yeah.
And yet
And
you
part of the
decided to.
problem with social anxiety is because you're so afraid of rejection, you don't share your concerns with others. You keep them hidden. So you
Right.
never get any evidence to the contrary. And I've had people who have said they've been anxious, socially anxious, all day, every day from the time their earliest memory of 4 or 5 years old, just constantly afraid of being judged and
Yeah.
being hurt by other people.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems very real. It all seems very real, and that's the problem. Yeah. I mean, I can go on to what actually happened.
Yeah, tell us.
And it's something. It's like a continuation of. And by the way, can you hear me okay right now?
Fairly
Yes.
good. There at one point the mic was really good.
Okay. Um, okay. Well, I think every time I did these exposures in person, I found that like people aren't really thinking about this the same way that I am. They're not thinking about like weaknesses in the same way that I am. And in fact, what I found is it like would bring me closer to people, and opening up about social anxiety, opening up about topics that I felt uncomfortable and I didn't want to be judged on. And I found that was true kind of on steroids in the internet, because it's like doing like 1,000-person self-disclosure. So as I was posting these updates, I mean, lots of things happened. Well, I mean, I got at least 100, and I think I've just over 1,000 followers on Instagram. I probably got definitely north of 100 messages from people, really supportive, thanking me for sharing, checking I'm okay. It actually like rekindled a lot of old friendships, because it was like people reached out that I hadn't spoken to in ages. So that was really beneficial. It even spurned sort of new romantic plot lines and relationships. And the whole thing was really positive.
Michael, what exactly did you share? Can you
Well,
be?
so yeah,
Did you send out those nude photos of yourself again?
Yeah, I got banned from doing that. I had to do a new account, unfortunately. No, so it was. So what was I sharing? It was just a documentation of my experience with the virus. So like it started off being like, okay, I'm here I went to City MD. I'm sick. I'm not sure if I've got it. The testing situation was pretty bad at the time. And then like a couple of days later, I posted like some more videos saying like, okay, this is how I'm feeling. This is a symptoms update. And then yeah, so it was a documentation of my progress through the virus. And then I lost my sense of taste and smell, and I talked about that. And it sounded like it was helpful for a lot of people, because yeah, like I said, I got it really early, so it kind of showed people a trajectory through the virus, and that was part of why I wanted to do it, in addition to facing my fears and insecurities. So and then I posted a wrap up video the other day where I basically was like, okay, like I'm all recovered. I've been feeling better for a while, and like, oh, actually the hardest part of me having coronavirus was not the virus itself. It was talking about the whole thing on social media. Because it's like I have a hard time opening up and being vulnerable about things, because I'm afraid of being judged and afraid people will leave. And that video was really scary to post.
Did you post that one?
Posted it. I posted it, and it's just like, and I got a lot of learnings from every time I do this. I get a lot of really good, powerful learnings. Like, so that video, for example, I was like, yeah. So I said what I just said, which is, I'm recovered. Actually, the hardest thing about this was posting it. The hardest thing about coronavirus was documenting it, because I had these fears of being judged and that people will leave. And what and to me, posting that was, yeah, like really scary. But my friends, I sent it to a couple people before I launched it, and my friend, she was like, you realize that this isn't, people are just going to look at this and be like, oh, like it's nice that he's opening up about it. It's not like, oh my god, there's like this is such a big reveal. And I think that it's an interesting point, because like when you're anxious about something, or you're getting triggered in these really deep ways, your thinking is so completely disproportionate to reality, or so completely out of proportion with what the truth is. But it's really, the problem is, it's really, really, really hard to see that, because you've just got the thoughts in your own head.
One of the things that's always fascinated me about treatment of depression and anxiety as well is that when you're upset, you believe things that are totally fraudulent,
Yeah.
and yet you believe them with all your heart.
Yeah.
It's not like a maybe. It's like, this is the absolute certainty. I'm seeing the truth about myself. I'm not good enough. I'm weak.
Right.
I'm unappealing.
Right.
And although we all have our own version of that, I can imagine that of the people listening to this podcast right now, I would guess many, if not most, have struggled with the idea now or at some point in your life that I'm not good enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not
Sure.
smart enough, I'm not handsome
Sure.
enough, I'm not successful enough, I'm not this enough, I'm not that enough. And that pain can seem so fantastic. And then when a person recovers and goes into a state of enlightenment, and you suddenly see what utter rubbish that you've been telling yourself, it's not only fun and amazing to have that experience, but it's also kind of, how in the world could I have believed those things? And I do a lot of work with, as you know, Michael, with the daily mood log, having people write down their negative thoughts when they're depressed and identify the distortions in them and find ways to talk back to those thoughts and to crush them. But it's nice to have that written record, because I've then run into people years later who are still happy and on a high, and say, why don't we look at some of your negative thoughts that you had way back when you were depressed? And it's hard for them to believe that they could have been giving themselves these kinds of messages, and yet that's depression and anxiety, the world's oldest cons, and you're really seeing that in a dramatic way, Michael. You mentioned one other thing that you wanted to include in today's podcast, and you can include anything you want, of course, but you said you want to talk about a little bit about this idea of fractals, which is one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, me too, actually, and that's because it's just
what is
really
a fractal, Michael?
Yeah, no, I feel like I'm in the school quiz now.
Well,
it's a repeating pattern. It's found throughout nature, right? And
yeah,
it's just a repeating pattern.
Yeah, perfect.
And it's a really awesome and powerful mental model to have when you're trying to probe your own psyche and behavior. Because what winds up happening is, so for me, for example, I have these fears of being judged, fears that people will leave. Those two are big ones. And
because
they come
I'm
up.
not good enough, I'm weak, I'm not desirable enough, something like
Sure.
that.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
flawed.
Like I never really like drilled down to the root one there, but like something like that. Yeah. Something in that direction. And those ones come up. So those fears got triggered by posting coronavirus, but they'll also get triggered in like social situations. They'll get triggered in dating situations. They'll get triggered all the time. And it's really helpful to have this model of the fractal, because okay, like that's my fractal. That's my fractal, like those fears. And it helps you to see that they're probably BS, or they're probably not true. Because if the external situation is constantly changing, and yet you're constantly interpreting it in terms of these root fears, then it's helpful, really helpful for me, because then I see, okay, well, probably this is something that's going on with me, and it's actually not anything to do with what's outside. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's like that's all she wrote for each person.
Right.
We all have our own fractal. There's just kind of one thing that causes you to be depressed or anxious, and can be somewhat different for each person. But it's not like you have to analyze your whole childhood and your whole life You
Right.
can take any moment when you're upset and say, what are my negative thoughts? What am I telling myself? What is the theme that's going on at this moment? And every time you're upset, it will just be a repeat of that one thing. It's like there's this one, wiring thing in your brain that probably just consists of a few neurons that have this system. Like, people are going to reject you, people are going to judge you, and that's the only aberration there in the brain, and that's the only thing one needs to work on in therapy. And when you recover and you see this as to be total rubbish and you're in a state of euphoria, in the future when you get upset again, it will always be a return of that exact same thing. And that's why the relapse prevention training is so important. So when that thing jumps out from behind a bush to try to frighten you or intimidate you, you'll know exactly what to do to crush that system again.
And I think one thing to add to that is it's interesting to see other people's fractals in response to a same situation, because then that's just another data point for you to be like, oh, my fears are probably not accurate. So for example, when I was posting this video, this most recent video, like my fears are the same, like being judged and the people will leave. And I was speaking about it to my friend, and for her, she's like, oh, well, my fear is always, who am I to post something like that? And like, who am I to like post my thoughts about things? And I'm like, wow, that's so,
like, I don't matter.
Right.
I'm insignificant.
I'm not somehow like not important enough to post my thoughts on the internet, or and that made me realize, oh yeah, like, so other people's fears are different. Everybody's got their own fractal, and that probably means that for the most part our fractals are all just like inaccuracies.
Yeah.
Because because they all can't like simultaneously be true.
Well, you know that yours aren't true because you've had the courage to test them with experiments, and the feedback's been pretty overwhelming.
Michael, what was it like to get the feedback? You said over 150 people reached out to you with supportive messages. What was that like to get those?
I mean, it was really awesome. It felt great. And it just kind of, every time I do this, whether it's in person or online, it just gives me another little data point for my brain to be like, oh, the world doesn't quite work how you think it does. Like, relationships don't quite work how you think they do. Like, they're a lot more forgiving than you imagine them to be.
Nice.
Yeah, that's right. That's always been a shock to my system too. That's a good topic for another day. But I know you can identify with this also, Rhonda. In terms,
I totally can.
I don't matter. Have we posted that?
No,
podcast?
It'll be that's coming up.
Coming up. So that's something to look forward to.
That's May 25th.
Yeah, we have this lovely colleague who thought she didn't matter too, and offered to do some live work, and so that's going to be awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Michael. We really appreciate it, and again, we're just so grateful that you're back alive and kicking. I've heard through the grapevine that you're considering starting your own podcast about getting real with Michael, as opposed to hiding our feelings and putting on a facade the way so much of the world does. And we wish you the luck with that. And once you're ready to go public with us, let us know so we can steer folks in your direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's all in the works at the moment, but I will give you updates when I have them.
I forgot to ask you, Michael, since to make it a bit more in the here and now, since your fear is that by being vulnerable and by opening up about your fears, people are going to leave you and people are going to judge you. How were you feeling while we did that podcast? How were you feeling at this moment?
Definitely a little uncomfortable. Yeah, sharing all these topics in so much detail is always uncomfortable for me. Yeah. I mean, fortunately, as I've done this more and more, it's gotten easier and easier and easier. Like, if I compare this to the last podcast we did, I'm definitely more comfortable now. But yeah, still I still feel it still makes me a little
like even now,
uncomfortable.
people may be judging me.
Sure. Yeah. I don't even know what my thoughts are. It's like this physical, like anxiety and little anxiety, tension, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, and you feel it in a very somatic way, very physical, experiential way. I have one other question for you. A lot of people won't confront their fears and go into wrestling matches with therapists who try to persuade them to confront their fears.
Oh God, yeah.
It's not easy. Has this been difficult for you to do all these postings on Instagram and appearing on this podcast and telling people about how you're feeling? Is that hard for you to do? And and if so, how do you get yourself to do it?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so especially for people who haven't done it at all. Well, what I find is, it's always like the first one that's always the hardest. Like I think the first time I told somebody I had social anxiety, that was the hardest, and then it became easier with time. And like, so if out of 10 it was like an 8 at the beginning, then it became a 2. Towards the end, and so that's applied to, like, doing it one-on-one, doing it in groups, doing it in dating situations, now doing it online, doing it on the podcast. I think all these activities have their own like scale, and like the more that I do it, the more comfortable I become with it, probably because my brain sees that the world doesn't come to an end.
Yeah, that's why I don't have a private practice anymore, as you know, Michael, and I don't have an office where I sit down and treat people, but I do a lot of therapy for people for free, really, and on the hikes and various things, and it seems like all the therapists I work with have social anxiety and will be on the hikes and they'll be feeling very anxious. And one reason I like being out hiking with people when we're working on something like that, instead of giving someone a homework assignment to do exposure and then they might wimp out and not do it, I can just stop a stranger on the hike and say, Michael here has something to tell you. And I tell the person, tell that person right now about your social anxiety. And it really makes it easier. I mean, the person can't escape my clutches, so to speak. It happens. They don't have to, obsess about it for months, building up the courage. Okay, we're going to do it right now. And then they almost always get great results. I think when you came out here and we were hiking, I think I forced you to tell 29 people or something in a row that you had social anxiety.
Yeah, we almost got arrested.
Were they judging you? And actually, that one person did judge you. This fellow we ran into at a park who seemed kind of confused and paranoid. And it was paradoxically not upsetting at all, but the people that they gave you such warmth and love, and it's so much fun to do that and to deliver that kind of relief and insight.
Totally. And whenever I've done this for the first time, like I say, in like the various different situations, it was hard, like, and in some cases very hard. And there's not really any way to do it but just to do it, unfortunately. Right. That's the bad part. That's the unfortunate part about it. And you just have to have this moment. It sort of feels like jumping off a cliff, and like you've got a parachute but you're not sure if it's going to open.
Right.
And that's the best way I can think about it. And you just kind of got to do it and just
Well, thanks. That brings it a little bit more to life for our listeners on an emotional level. So we'll say goodbye again and look forward to all of you rejoining us on our next Feeling Good podcast, or our Feeling Good CoronaCast, and this will be CoronaCast number 7. Thanks again, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and everyone listening. Bye. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. The theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good Podcast.